Excellent. So welcome to a communications conversation today. As you all know, we are recording the webinar. We will share the slide deck, the chat, and the recording in the follow-up. And if you are here with us today, you are earning 1 CAE credit. So let's jump in. I always like to make sure you know who's doing the talking here. I'm Peggy Hoffman with Mariner Management, and this is brought to you by the awesome and incredible team of Bill Highway and Mariner. Now, many of you may know us. Bill Highway is the tech solution for components. They're also part of, Pexium is part of their family of programs now. So they've got lots of technology solutions for you. And Mariner, of course, is your partner in really building more resilient components and volunteers. And absolutely love the opportunity to be able to talk with folks and see what their questions is. Now, it's really interesting because when you pick a Bill Highway solution or a Mariner solution, you think you're buying just that. But really what you're also buying is a deep understanding of how important communications is. Because we understand the power of communications can either support or deep six initiatives. And that's the reason why we wanted to devote today's hour on this idea about conversation. Now, what's really cool is we oftentimes reach out and tap people that we think are true gurus in this. And that's what brings us to having Sherry Singer with us today. Sherry's waving right now, and we're going to give her a formal introduction in just a moment. But what I really love about our ability to bring in and tap into the community writ large on these kinds of conversations is making sure you all know that you're not alone. The association community has lots and lots of resources. We like to believe Bill Highway and Mariner are key resources, and I can tell you without a question, so is Sherry Singer of Singer Communications. So we'll get a chance to learn a little bit more about her. Now, we don't need to overstay what the problems are. We know that there are challenges in getting and keeping our chapter leaders' attention and in their ability to get and keep their members' attention. So many things have really changed since COVID, although many of those were changing pre-COVID, if we're going to be really honest. And now we have to absolutely address it. I think, though, that the real elephant in the room that we don't spend enough time talking about is this lack of trust. The biggest obstacle, by and large, is the fact that you have got a situation where we are trying to communicate in an area where we don't quite have the trust. As a matter of fact, let me throw up a poll and let's find out, when we say the word trust, what's on your mind. Here we go. Which of these trust issues do you run into? Which of these trust issues do you run into? Is it this us versus them mentality? Maybe it's that kind of inherited mindset from the past leadership. And maybe it's mixed communications. One person says one thing, one says another thing. Could be just some mixed responsiveness. Maybe do you just not have the chapter leader's perspective? Or maybe you do, but your communicators that are on your team don't. And if there's something else, go ahead and do tell us in chat. Do tell us in chat. Oh, Lisa, I just saw your comment in chat, speaking of which. Thank you. Love to hear that. Love to hear that. Great. And I'm glad to see Pamela said she's new to chapter communications and hoping to learn some nuggets for her new job. All right. So folks are answering very quickly. I love how you all jump on. This is a huge part of how we help you answer the questions that you bring, is by doing these polls. Looks like I've got many of you connected. Give you just a few more moments here. So far, I'll just mention, Sherry, that the us versus them mentality is the lead, of course. All right, let me go ahead and end the poll for just a moment and share the results. So I think that I remember very specifically Sherry saying at one point that one of the things that she hears consistently is the us versus them mentality as an issue. And she's going to talk a little bit more about that when we bring her on. But I do think it's important for us to understand that the trust is tied to is tied to what our volunteer leaders are hearing from the people in their hometown. That's that inherited mindset. And it's worth us getting a little deeper and understanding that. So suggesting that we really sort of tackle those two things. So as I sort of mentioned, all of these things are important, but Sherry mentioned in a conversation we had, I think the last two items, which I think are pretty interesting for us to spend some time chewing on, which is one is we're being a bit too selective in what we share. We're not being as transparent as we need to be. We may think it's because we're protecting or we're not ready to talk about something, but that can be a real miss in terms of how it impacts the trust. And secondly is sometimes we're just completely ghosting. We're so busy ourselves that we don't take the time to ask, what have we said or not said? So I think it's really important that we do give ourselves the opportunity to think about those two obstacles within trust and how can we address them. So this is the time where I get to bring in the expert. Sherry opened her business back in 2002. I'd like to say that 2002 was a stellar year for the association community, because two awesome businesses opened that same year, Mariner and lovely Singer Communications. Now, she's been partner with hundreds of associations, corporations, and government agencies, and picked up some awards along the way. Now, I'd love for you to kind of visit with her, learn a little more about the full plate of communications that she offers, because she certainly is a full service communications firm. However, I want you to listen specifically for what I think is germane here, and that is work on developing a communication strategy, because I want you to think, what's my overall strategy for engaging chapters and communities, right? The second thing is putting together communication campaigns, putting together ambassador programs. Basically, think, how do I provide chapters with that kind of toolkit and training that allows us to move an issue or a message forward, right? And three, training. Think, I got to get my volunteers better at working with the media, or better about talking about us, or better in any communication skills. So those are the three things that I think she offers lots of skills and sets, but I think that may very well be one of the three that you want to talk with her about. But let me go ahead and douse this, to pause my share here. Let me go ahead and pause this and bring Sherry on. Sherry, say hello to the crowd.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today.
Excellent. I am super excited to have this conversation with you. And there's so many things I want to ask. But let me start with maybe kind of a big one, which is how do we really effectively measure our communication effectiveness and really identify areas for improvement? I know we walk around and we say our communications is effective or it isn't effective, but how do we know?
So in the chat, if you could just throw your answers, that would be great. How many of you do a membership survey every year, every other year? Just throw it into the chat. That's a really good place to start finding out what your members think about your communications. I've done a lot of these audits specifically focused on communications, where you're asking your members, what communications product or service do you find most valuable? Do you think that we communicate too much, not enough? Can you tell the difference between the HQ, the headquarters communication, and the chapter communication? You know, associations have changed over the years. It's not just post-COVID, which everybody's changed, right? It's also pre-COVID, and way back in the 80s and 90s, when a lot of associations moved to the DC area, they did so because their members were telling them that advocacy was the most important thing. But today, when you do those same surveys, what members are saying is networking and connecting with others is the most important thing. And how do you network and connect with others? Through communication. So we can see this shift and how communications is playing a very important role in that newer shift with why people are joining your association. So I think they're hardcore measurements that you can do to measure your association's communications effectiveness. And what I'm talking about there is things like a survey, click rates, and then there's softer things, and I wouldn't discount those softer things. It's feedback from your membership. Are they saying they're happy? Do they feel like, did you send out something or post something on Facebook and get a lot of negative feedback or positive feedback? Those are just as valid as your hardcore, more harder, nose kind of measurements that you might do.
So, of course, you mentioned communications audit, and that obviously is one of the tools we can absolutely use. Can you just speak a little bit more to the communications audit? And maybe you've done so many of them. Maybe there's a learning or two that you've gotten over the time.
I'm just ready to do another one. For a new client. I almost always do them in the engagement with a new client, because from a communications expert perspective, I need to know what the organization has to be able to fill in gaps of things that they may not have. And so that audit really helps tell that. I will say that over the past 5 or 6 years, when I've done these audits, the number one thing that every association kind of fails with or needs improvement, I would say, in the old report card method of grading, is that there's too many words that they put on their products and information. And before COVID, and even this was even happening, Peggy, as you mentioned, this was even before COVID, right? But certainly since COVID, we used to write, I know one association maybe 3 or 4 years ago would ask me to write a fundraising letter for them. And the fundraising letter, listed all the things they had done and during the year. And then at the end, asked the members to contribute or donate to their foundation. But now you can't do it that way. You've got to make the ask right in the front, even in the subject line, and then go on to build the case as to why the member needs to do that, right? So I think we need to pay more attention to what we're asking members to do right at the front end of an email or at the front end of a telephone conversation or Zoom call, and then follow it up with the data supporting what we need to say. Also, communications audits really need to look at no more than 20 of your products. Once you start getting beyond that, I mean, I did a communications audit a number of years ago for a very large association. It was chapters and national. And we looked at 78 products, and it just becomes unwieldy to look at that many products. And of course, my recommendation was collapse some. Who needs 78 products? That was only a portion of what we looked at. And I was like, collapse. And they were like, oh, we don't like this communications audit because it's telling us to do away with things. But, in essence, you might be helping your members to get to the most important information if you're not flooding them with all this additional information. So in an audit process, you look at these 20 materials and you look at their effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And it's really helpful to have somebody outside look at it and to really get their perspective, because like Peggy said, the experts have worked with a number of different associations across a number of different types of industry, and that perspective could be invaluable to you.
So, the communication audit concept, I want to stay with it for just another moment or two, because one of the things that I was just at a chapter leader program over the weekend in Detroit, and it was a great conversation that we had. But one of the things that they were lamenting, and I hear this all around the country, is that they can't get people to their events. And I always say to them, there's probably two things that it could be one of two things. One of them is the event is just a miss in general, right? You're just not, you're not being creative or experienced, whatever. But the other thing is the message may not be getting out. So my question is there, or what suggestion or thoughts would you have for a chapter in terms of doing its own communication audit? And, or is it possible to do a communications audit for a national organization, like one of the CRPs brought you in, for example, and sort of address that at the chapter level? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea to include chapters in an audit. As I mentioned, I have done that in the past. And I think that one of the things that I did with that audit, and it was a large audit taking place over like 6 months, because we were looking at 78 different pieces of material. And then additionally, I did probably 50 individual interviews with chapter. This organization was large enough to have chapters and staffs in chapters, at various at their various organizations. So I talked with not only members at the various chapters, but also the staff that was staffing that particular chapter. I think sometimes it's difficult to do chapter by chapter because by areas of the country, chapters could be different. Also by, one chapter could have 50 members, another chapter could have 200 members, right? And another one could have 2. And so those chapters are going to function differently, but the way they're communicating their information should be somewhat the same. And where I think both national and chapters fail, in addition to having too many words, like I always put things down now and try to do a really good edit. Come back to it and do a really good edit, is they're pushing information out and they're not engaging members in a two-way street of conversation. There's a really big difference when you're, let's say, doing an annual meeting and you push it out and you say, like on your Facebook page, join us for our annual meeting. Here's the registration link. Instead of saying, Bob Brown is our keynote speaker and this is a topic that they're going to talk about. And we have these 3 sessions. Hope you can join us, right? And you're like teasing them with the information. You're showing them what's in it for them. I did a chapter leadership speaking engagement for another large association, and I called it 30 marketing ideas in 60 minutes. And I literally zipped through, it was really 42, but 30 and 60 sounded better for the title. So I gave them more than they expected to get. But that's something that you should think about doing in your chapters, because just igniting that kind of passion and giving them a whole range of ideas, people get excited about that and then they want to use the information.
So that kind of that brings us to me a couple of questions, but you're dancing on this idea of how are we supporting chapters to be better communicators, and of course helping them do a chapter audit or some kind of idea, giving them actually real life examples, tools and templates, kinds of things. That talk for a moment, if you can, about this idea of tools and templates and the fact that we can put stuff out there, but how do we train our chapter leaders to understand the power of using that tool or template? Have you seen any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've done when I'm doing an awareness campaign, I believe that you also need to involve chapters, because there you're really boots on the ground. Yes. And to that, I've created like a public education or communications toolkit. There's probably 15 different activities in the kit. Everything from just putting in your email signature, I'm a member of XYZ Association, ask me how you could join. Very simple. Anyone could do that. All the way up to speaking in front of Congress, testifying in front of Congress, or answering a media inquiry from a top tier newspaper. And the interesting thing about leveraging your members to do this, and leveraging your members through the chapters, is that sometimes we all think in our associations, and we're sitting in our ivory towers, right? And we think the only people who can do this kind of thing is the board. But that's not necessarily true. What I found with associations in walking them through how to set up an ambassador program and then training spokespeople for that ambassador program, I found that you get emerging leaders. You get somebody who's not a committee chair, who's not a board member, who's really interested in being a representative for the industry. And that person then comes up in your industry as a rising leader.
So let's stay on that ambassador program. I was going to ask you about that anyway. I'm really intrigued because I believe you did a session for ASAE on this whole idea of an ambassador program, and it does strike me that we are missing sometimes the training, the preparation, and really getting our chapter leaders and chapter members to be ambassadors for the organization. And that's part of the trust too. If we invest in them, they feel like we care about them and they're more likely then to listen or share with us. Can you give us just a quick description of the ambassador program that you've been helping associations put together?
So the ambassador program, the easiest way to understand it, it's really the Speakers Bureau, but it's in a much broader kind of format. So what this is it's identifying potential leaders and current leaders, and then training them to deliver your association's messaging. We think often that if we line up all of our board members, of course they know how to describe the association. But I bet you, if you lined up all your board members tomorrow without any training, without any message document, and you ask them, what is XYZ Association? If you have 10 board members, you might get 10 different answers. Your messaging is really your verbal logo. It's really your brand and how people are expressing that verbally. We don't think anything of spending thousands of dollars on creating a new logo, a new name, or altering our name slightly, going to letters instead of a whole full name, changing our website and whatever, but we don't think about putting money into training our leadership and other members so they can talk about our association in one voice. So we're not having 10 board members describe an association in different ways. And the nicest thing about the ambassador program is you never tell anyone no, they can't be an ambassador. If it's somebody that you don't think will really carry the organization's message forward in a productive way, you can use those people to write a blog or maybe post something on social media. It can be a really small thing. And in that way, you can leverage everyone. And when I give this session on how to start an ambassador program or how to launch an ambassador program, one of my favorite slides is I have this slide of a woman and she's like this. I think the biggest secret is you take everyone and then you leverage the people who really are stepping up and stepping forward. And just like the communications toolkit, there is an ambassador toolkit with all the activities that they could possibly do for your organization.
Well, it strikes me, we spend a lot of time, and I bet I could, if I asked in, and let me go ahead and do this, ask in what the chat, do you all run into a situation where your leaders are saying something at the local level different than than the message should be at the national level? Let's see, has anybody got that? Let's see. Anybody have that situation? Let's see what comes up in the, yeah. So the reason why I like the ambassador program is because it's not reprimanding them yes, look at this. It's not reprimanding them or smacking them on the hand or anything. It's saying being able to speak and tell the story and be connected to the larger picture, it elevates you in your own profession, and we're going to train you for that. And am I getting it right? I think that.
It's a member benefit. So it benefits the association. We can all see that really clearly, but it's also a member benefit. You're training future leaders on messaging. And it's shocking to me. And I would like to ask this question too. I see, Peggy, you're getting a lot of yeses from Abigail and Jenny and Wes and Samantha, but I'd also like to ask the question, how many of you have a messaging document for your association? Just throw your answers in the chat and we can see, because 90% of the associations I start working with, they do not have a messaging document. There's no 3 or 4 overarching messages. There's no, sub messages about, maybe advocacy or your annual meeting or even your publications, right? Mm-hmm. You need to have that document. I, as a very strong ASAE volunteer, I've been asking for ASAE to create that document for years. It's like, because you have 42,000 members and 1,000 leaders, and they're all describing the organization in a slightly different way in terms of their perception. So if you don't have a messaging document, you may need one. And if you don't think you need one, it's also a really good behind the scenes recruiting tool, right? Because we're all like experiencing this issue of membership where, people are, 50, 60, they're retiring, they're no longer members, active members, and we want to get new blood into our chapters and our national organizations. And one way to do this is to offer this program, because you're training these people on how to give a presentation, how to talk to the media in their regular jobs, not only for your association. So it is a member benefit and a member proposition.
So of course, in my little mind, what's coming up, and I don't know, folks in chat, go ahead and say it, is that could be a really cool workshop at a chapter leader conference. It's okay. I just have to put it up there, because I constantly, and this community is constantly asking itself, what have you heard? Who, what kinds of training are you doing? And that would be sort of a natural one. I did like that. I saw that a number of people said that they have pieces of this, but they don't have the whole thing. And Samantha mentions that they're working on communication documents right now. So it'd be interesting if anybody has any and they would like to share, to go ahead and share with the group here. I think it's useful for us to see what other folks are doing along this process. But this idea of training and making it a member benefit and really empowering our folks, I think it has another positive thing, Sherry, that I just want to throw out there. The other positive thing is that sometimes CRPs, and you tell me in chat if you disagree, sometimes CRPs feel like we're islands, right? That the rest of the staff don't get us. But that could elevate the importance of chapter leaders. And in doing that, it could kind of like get the best of the staff to go, oh, you've got it. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like it would help that relationship as well. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
And one thing I think that's important to do, and I've done it with a number of associations that I've worked with, is I've actually been the outside consultant that's come in and talked to chapters about the toolkit and how to walk through it, the ambassador toolkit, the communications toolkit, and walk them through what they could do, so that if they had any questions or anything that was kind of lingering, like, yeah, I got this great toolkit, but I don't know how to use it, and I have questions about it. I don't know what this means. This is not my ballywick. And it's a really interesting process for me, because I kind of have to go back to the start of my career and pretend like I don't know what any of this is, right? Because I don't want to say, oh, create a media list. And they're like, what's a media list, right? So you kind of have to explain what the things are in the toolkit that you're asking them to create at a chapter level.
Let's stay for a moment on the training issue. Are there other skills or other examples of training that we might be wanting to look at? And I'm gonna throw a little bit of a a loop in here for either our chapter leaders or chapter staff, right? Or for ourselves as CRPs. I mean, where do you think where should we apply some training in terms of the whole system? What have you seen and what do we should apply?
Yeah. So in terms of training, I'm going to get into the minutia level and then I'll go up to the more global level. You can train as many people as you want. I was telling Peggy before we started that I actually trained over 100 people on a Zoom call. That's so nice about video conferencing. You can use this medium to really train as many people as you want. And additionally, I feel that it's advantageous to everyone. This is a little bit off topic, but I think that creating a situation where a dialogue can happen between the chapters and the national organization is really critical. So things like ask me anything, like a session. And do you really care if 5 people only show up to ask me anything? No, because what you're trying to illustrate at the ask me anything is you're open to questions, to ask, to anybody asking you anything. And you're building that trust that Peggy talked about at the beginning of the session with various chapters from the national organization. Town halls are another good, open forum. Some town hall that you would speak at the beginning and then have an open forum afterwards. I think all of that is really, really helpful to your members, just to know that you're there and you're willing to listen. The ultimate is to get as many people as you can to participate, but the real hidden gem is your ability to show chapters that it's not us and them, we're all together in this, and that you're willing to listen to their concerns on a very granular level.
So let me do a follow-up question on that, because I think the 2 things come to my mind I'd love to get your advice on. And as a side, I just put in folks, if you have a communications question you'd like Sherry to answer while we have her here, because we have her for a few more minutes, please throw that in chat. But let me ask this question. So I've had this open house and it was virtual, and I get like 8 people, and I'm like, okay, 8 people. Recommendations for how I take what did happen with those 8 and maybe share it broader. That's number 1. And number 2, recommendations for what do I do with the feedback I got? Because sometimes that feedback is stuff I just can't do anything about. And sometimes it's stuff that has a really long lead before I could actually see the impact of it. I know those are two separate questions.
Yeah.
So the first one is, how do I take that 8 and get it out there? And the second one is, what do I do with
Right.
with the
Let me start with the first question. How do I get it out there? So if your association has a blog, that would be a great place to put it. If they don't, go to LinkedIn and do, if you have a LinkedIn page, post it on LinkedIn. You don't have to have an author's blog or a specific blog page. Social media is a good way to then get it out, get that article out. Hey, did you miss this? Are you interested in learning more? Link here. That would maybe have 10 tips to, or 5 tips to, again, I'm trying to cut down on the wordiness. No one should have 10 tips, but anyway, so those kinds of things are, I think, are really good. Use your social media channels to draw people in and give them something valuable. So if there was a session and you write an article, even an article on your website or an article in your e-newsletter, make sure to push that out via social media so that people can link to it after the date. And sometimes it's worthwhile, if you see that you had 8 people attending, but then you have 60 people who are interested in the article, maybe wait a couple months and push it out again. Okay. Hey, have you done this, or are you interested in this? Or, hey, we got some questions about this at National. Here's some of the answers for our chapter, and push that article out again. Because remember, you can reuse that information. A lot of it's evergreen.
Okay, great. Love that. I got a follow-on question to that. I just got a question in chat. Can you please discuss some of the most effective marketing and communications relationships and models between national and chapters that you may have seen? So we're looking to build on the successes maybe that you've seen along that. Any thoughts on that, Sherry?
Hi, Deborah. Thank you for your question. I don't have any specific thoughts on it, but I will tell you that chapter leadership kind of tour that I did with that one association, where we were using the ambassador and the communications toolkit to kind of walk them through, that was really invaluable for them, because not only did I walk them through the toolkit, but they had questions relevant to their specific chapter. And believe me, the questions were different in New Jersey than they were in Texas. A lot of them were regional questions. And again, it depends on the size of the chapter, how many active leaders you have. In some cases, when I was doing that chapter leadership, like ask me anything kind of thing and toolkit walkthrough, in some chapters, there were 20 people on, and in other chapters, there were 5. So you can see the difference. And I think that there's a little bit of a mistake when we're trying to kind of lump in what are the best communications recommendation between national and chapters, because all the chapters are so different in so many associations. It really almost needs to be customized for that particular chapter. The chapter with 60 people are looking, how do we connect national and chapter, right? But the chapter with 5 people, they're looking, how do we get more members into our chapter, right? So they have different issues, and I think that affects what communications and marketing tools that you would use. Overall, though, Deborah, my answer to that question would be, in real estate, it's location, location, location. And in nationals and chapters, to avoid that us versus them, it's communication, communication, communication.
And I like a couple of things that you said that I want to lift up. So this idea that chapters are all different. And so taking the time then to speak with chapters individually is what I'm taking away from it. It's like the best communication relationship and model is the one that recognizes that we can't do with this one-to-many. We do have to do this one-to-one. The one-to-many to get the straight away message out, but the one-to-one to build the relationship and make sure that you get the clarity that you need. So I really appreciated you talking about that and that tour. But the second thing I'm hearing is that the most effective associations, that the model that's really working for national chapters most effectively is the one that has a combination of I'm sending stuff out and I'm listening and asking for it back. So it's a intentionality around creating that two-way stream, and that the ask me anything, the forum, having the presidents go ahead and visit other chapters, events, or activities. All of those things are an opportunity to create the feedback loop. Anything else you would add that you would highlight that you said beyond those two? I think those two are really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to creating trust. How do you create trust in any human relationship? Not just national and chapters, but when you think of your own life, boss and employee, spouse, your children, et cetera, your friends, how do you create trust? You have open lines of communication, and that builds a framework of trust. So even when you have to deliver not so great news, you have that basis of trust,
Right.
and they know that you're being as honest and forthright with them as possible. Someone just asked a really long question about the social media channel idea, and what advice do you have for those policies around social media posts when they're restricted?
Mhm.
I understand why I work with a client and have worked with them for 10 years, and they are constantly dealing with crises in their industry. And at times they've actually even had so much going on, they've had to close their social media posting totally for 6 months or so, because it's so negative, and it's like one or two people and whatever, and it really affects the industry in a negative way. However, I am of the mind that social media is an organic way of communicating. And this, limiting policies and restricting kind of goes against the grain. I understand completely from my client that deals with crisis all the time why people are doing that, but I wonder if it's the best policy. What do you think about that, Peggy?
It really should be organic, and yet the crisis communicator in me understands that we have to put some
Boundaries.
guardrails on it, if you will,
Yeah.
some guardrails on it. I feel like the one of the ways I would deal with that if I was in an environment where we were restricted and I couldn't get that give and take communications. This person mentions this idea of using a SharePoint site or a place where there's a safe space, for a safe but controlled space for folks to have a conversation. I would definitely be looking at, is there a place where I can have some ongoing conversation with my chapter leaders that's not out in the mainstream? And then I would spend some time helping my chapter leaders find that place and be welcomed when they get into that place. We work with one organization who was going through a massive chapter change, and we created literally a microsite within their program, within their website. One was completely open for everybody to be able to see, and the other one was closed for leaders to see. And we really spent a lot of time in conversations with the chapter leaders, telling them where that was, sharing that link, and then validating when they posted there. So sometimes we do have to, if we're going to have a conversation, I think get out of the public space. But I think the other thing too is, what is our protocol for responding when we get something in the social media place? Like, I know that your communications team says before you can respond to that, you have to get it accepted. But is there a way of simply being able to post things like, "We hear you, thank you"? I mean, just there's a simple way of saying, "We hear you, and now let's take this offline." And I don't think we invest enough time in getting sort of the tacit approval to at least be able to acknowledge, and whatever the appropriate acknowledgement way would be.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And I also think this is, the communicator in me has to bring this up. But sometimes when you can't put things in writing, you need to pick up that phone, the one that kind of looks like this.
Yeah.
Remember the phone? We're also like, oh, let's have a one-on-one conversation on Zoom. I'm like, why? There's the phone, So I think sometimes phone calls are a good way to talk to somebody. I know you can't call every member that wants to post, but in certain cases, if somebody's really insistent and kind of raising a ruckus about the fact they can't post on social media without it being approved, I think a conversation one-on-one with them. And again, not an email. That's really an impersonal way of commenting. But the phone allows this two-way conversation where they feel that they're being heard, and that their member value proposition might really depend on that phone call with you. and understanding the way you said, Peggy, just thank you, we're looking into it or whatever, this acknowledgement that they're being heard.
Right. So I think it's interesting. There's a great question I want to come to in just a moment, but I also want to say that one of the things that I just saw recently in an email exchange that I had was someone in their signature line said, find time for us to talk, find time for us to Zoom. And there were two separate links. And what I loved about that was this idea that we don't always have to be Zooming. Sometimes the anonymity of not being on video allows us to say things or get deeper into a conversation than maybe the eye contact would do. But I love this question, and Lord knows we've seen this question many times, where it's just the idea that you have someone, and this is what happens with volunteers. This is a volunteer issue, right? They're out of touch with the majority, disruptive to the unity, really don't do it. And they're upsetting people on both sides of the coin there. And the question, though, really, when you come all down to it, is there any bridge building tactics that we should consider? And how do we let people know what we're doing about this? Because I think that's the second part. Is other chapter leaders reach out to make sure we know that they're not in the camp. But do you have any suggestions, Sherry, on bridge building tactics?
Well, I think if there's like a naysayer, like, there's always one in every organization, right? I kind of call them Debbie Downers. I have to be really careful not to call somebody Debbie to their face, right?
That's right.
So, but talking to that person offline, like the president, not the CEO or the ED of your association, but the president making a call. So it's member to member and saying, we're really concerned about these issues we're raising. Here's what we're doing to solve them. Do you have any suggestions on how we can move it? Again, showing them that their opinion matters and that they're valuable to us, and that our president, their peer, their elected peer, is taking the time to really invest in what they have to say. And I find that a lot of times when you do that, sometimes it is somebody kind of crying for attention. And when you give them that attention, they kind of calm down. It's not that they're going to go away. It's not that they're suddenly going to be your biggest cheerleader, but at least some of the negativity gets a little bit tamped down. And that's really, in essence, what you want to do. And sometimes those naysayer comments are good comments. They lead to change. So sometimes they're really good comments. So I think, again, it just goes back to that communication one-on-one.
And I want to, and I just see that Jessica also was going to do a +1 on the comment of the notion of when you get to a certain point, it's got to be peer-to-peer, right? It cannot be the communications team or the CEO that's paid. It does need to be peer-to-peer, and it won't solve it every time, but it's a very important go-to. And anybody who's taken a CAE exam and passed it knows that the answer is usually volunteer to volunteer, staff to staff. So I think that's important. And I also think the one-on-one conversation is important. And I'm going to add something to this. There are people who do a drumbeat, and no matter what you say or do, they're going to do that. I believe in outshouting them. And what I mean by that is that I believe in making sure that the conversation that's counter to that gets as much airtime. And in fact, more airtime than the conversation that really isn't relevant or isn't accurate anymore. And that's kind of a weird, fuzzy thing to say, but I had that example back when I was back at a trade association, and we had a couple of voices that were really complaining. So I went around and called my ambassadors, and they came out with affirmations for where the organization was going. And those affirmations, they made sure they made individually to key stakeholders like our sponsors, our exhibitors, which were very important, our key funders, our big members, right? And they had individual and then collective conversation. So what we did was outshout, if you will, the negatives. It's a tightrope. I get it. But sometimes the best way, and you have the same thing when you're working with somebody who is very negative. If you can only say so many times, I hear you, I understand, it really is awful. At some point, you have to ask them what makes you happy, what is working for you, and change the conversation. And I kind of rattled on, but I found that's been that's been a success point for me.
It's like on Google, when you have a negative review, just keep posting positive reviews till that negative review goes on the second page, and who's going to read it at that point? So
yeah,
kind of
excellent, excellent. We have covered so much ground, and I held you longer than expected. But I really think having a conversation where we talk about communications and just kind of looking for the spaces where we can do something different. And I want to thank you for your time today. And I'm wrapping up to give you an example to, if there's anything else you want to add. But before I do that, I want to lift up a couple of things that you said. And a large part of what I heard was this idea of making sure you take the time to figure out if you are being effective, whether it's the communication audit, whether it's looking at the data, the clicks, whether it's the soft metrics of gathering the questions that you're getting and then looking down at them and saying, gee, this is the theme that we're seeing. But this idea of measuring effectiveness, giving yourself that base. And then the follow-up thing is that you got to do equal time of sending some stuff out and actually listening. So where are you building intentionally in the system for that? But then this really beautiful little kernel, this gift that you gave us about this idea of the ambassador program and how we can really empower the volunteers through a training that helps them, helps us, but then that helps with the messaging. It does so many things, and it's just a different approach than just saying how to create a better email. And the last thing I heard was good old hands-on training. Let's go ahead and train folks for the skills. Great advice from you, Sherry. What did I miss? What would you add? How would you close?
I would add that, their communications, even though we're in like a new world of communications, right? And we're talking about AI and we're talking, it's still good old fashioned communications. And your members are telling you that by the sense that they value networking as a way and a reason to belong to your association. And what is networking? It's connecting. And how do you connect? Through communication. So I think this idea of AI and all these tech tools, and they're all fabulous, but they're distribution channels of the content. And it's the content and the human connection. We all realized that during COVID, how much we needed that human connection. And so I would urge you all to go back to that really basic concept of connection, because that's really what associations are all about.
I love that. Thank you. Before you go, and I'm going to give one more poll, which I think we've talked about all of these different things. I would love to, and this may help Sherry. I should tell everybody, Sherry has agreed to come on back next year. We're going to be doing another webinar on communications, and it'd be really kind of nice, I think, for us to know what's on your mind in terms of what you have around communications. And so I've got a poll. It's a long poll, so scroll down, but just tell us which of these things you already have, and in chat, which of these things you'd like to hear more about. So go ahead. So I put in a bunch of things. Do you have a formal communication strategy around components, or maybe a communication schedule? Maybe you really do consider within the organization your components as a key stakeholder group. Great. But if not, maybe the ambassador program is sort of an example of how we can help you do that. Offer communications training skills. Do you dedicate a communications channel? Do you offer those open forums or coffee chats? Do you offer easy call scheduling? I've seen a number of CRPs now in their signature line. It says book time with me. And I love that. Often. And then we had somebody, Sherry, tell us a couple of webinars ago that she has, I think it's one morning a week. She does what she calls open office hours, and she opens up a Zoom and anybody can check in at any time. I thought that it was really, really cool. And she's just open there. So a neat idea. So folks are coming in. If there's something else that you do or something else you'd like to do, just go ahead and throw that into chat. I'm gonna let this run for, I got about half of you participating so far. So go ahead and put that.
Tiffany said she'd like to learn more about communication strategy with components and what an ideal communication schedule, I guess, part of a plan might look like in terms of tactics and scheduling tactics, and when.
That would be great. I think we sort of have pieces of it, but we don't put it all together. So that would be kind of neat. All right. Folks are still coming in. Every time I'm going to say that I'm going to pause this, I see that 3 or 4 more pop in. So let me give you another couple of moments here. All of these things, by the way, folks, the poll is made up of great tips and ideas that you are going to get in the full blog post. The link will be sent with the follow-up to all of this and for all of this information. But Sherry did a wonderful conversation with our writer, and we've got some good tips and other ideas happening. Also, when you get the slide deck, folks, there's a number of slides at the back of this that are going to give you some additional tips as well. So you will be getting that. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. It looks like the popcorn has stopped, and I'm going to share the results. The winner here is a formal communications plan for components, but that's only with 50% of the folks. So I think we could offer lots of different opportunities next year in our follow-up communications program. So lots of good stuff for that. Thank you again, Sherry. Really, really appreciate your time and effort in being a part of this. I'm going to pop the screen back up again.
Thanks for having me, Peggy. Really appreciate being here. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to email me directly. Always happy to chat with any of my association executive colleagues. Just 15 minutes to a half hour on Ask Me Anything, right?
Oh, I love it. I love the fact that you do exactly as you tell folks to do. That is excellent. That is excellent. Well, folks that have gathered us on this call, thank you to Sherry. I think that one of my big takeaways is that communications are built on a really firm foundation. And to me, the one foundation is our own individual communication skills. I love the fact that Sherry told us, and she has this in the article, don't use 10 words when 5 will work. So we have to look at how do we write? How do we communicate? Listen first, then respond, and clarify. But the second framework for us, or the second piece of the foundation, is the framework. And that is, how are we assuring that we've created clarity around expectations, roles, settings? This is your affiliation agreement. This is your job descriptions. It's going to be hard for you to be successful in communications if you don't take the time to really kind of work on your communication skill and make sure you have the framework in that you need it. A couple of quick thoughts. Sherry mentioned, I love the open dialogue idea. Super easy for us to incorporate. So let's keep that in our mind. This idea of personal support. I love the fact that Sherry talked about earning the credibility as an ally, not as a them. And really, we've talked about all these different things, which I think are great. I paused here on this one because this is super important for us to make sure that we have those notes, and then we extend our capabilities here. Awards and recognition. Many of us have awards programs, but do we share the impact of those contributions? And do we appreciate individually and collectively? And do we have a clear ongoing strategy, right? Training was excellent. I heard what she said, which was to use audience segmentation, get the right message to the right people, make sure you're tracking. Totally love that she talked about, it's a bigger picture thing, and consistency is key, and the skimmability, because she did keep talking about how can you get through those. The last thing I just want to mention before we close is this idea that Sherry really honed in on, this idea of making sure we have resources in there. Now, folks, we have been talking about communications, and I am super excited to make sure you know that we are continuing the communications conversation next month when the fabulous Betsy joins us to talk about Chat GPT. Now, we've been talking about getting your communications firmer. We've been talking about making sure the message is clear. Well, Chat GPT can help us with all of that, and Beth is going to tell us a little bit more about it. Now, that if you usually want to see Beth, usually you have to find her, you have to go to an event, costs money. We're bringing her to you free. This is a great opportunity for you to bring all of your questions. part of what we're going to really do here is also talk about GPT as a tool chapters can use. So please stay tuned for that. Also, drum roll, coming in 2024, CEX 2.0. We have had a demand for us to make sure that we do something again in 2024. I got 2 quick polls for you to help us on this, because we are super excited about the planning is already underway. Let me ask you, are you interested in a day of learning and connections? And if so, we're looking at April or May, and other, just throw that in chat. We want to do the springtime so that we can give you resources and connections early in the year rather than, waiting till the end of the year. So let us know. Oh, I see. We've got somewhat of a preference for April. Excellent. So you know that you will earn CAE credits for attending this. I think we got 5 last year. And the nice thing is, if you're getting ready to sit for the CAE exam or you're going for renewal, great way for you to get that. So really super excited. And before I close, give you another couple of seconds here, throw into chat anything that you can do. Yeah, look at this. Woohoo! I'm loving seeing this. Let's see. We've got so far coming in, we have got, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll to show you all that April is the winner. But what I really love is it looks like we've got quite a few people and we will sell out. So please watch for that. The last one is your friend and me, both of us are, oh, this one is saying I'm having difficulty with this. Okay. Well, I was going to put another poll in here, but it looks like the topics, it says that it will not launch. I was going to ask you, so put it in chat. What topics do you want to see for 2024 in terms of webinars? We're putting together our webinar schedule. Are you looking for things on member engagement, on volunteer development? Are you, oh, I just launched it. Oh, Sarah's so cute. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Sometimes we need technology help. Am I right? Excellent. So we've got this coming in here. Excellent. This is important. We bring you these webinars free of charge, but they're only valuable if we're hitting the topics that you think are worthwhile. So do tell us what you think. Make sure you scroll because there's a number of comments there, and other is in chat. Other is in chat. So make sure that you do that. Excellent. Keep pulling that in there. And while you do that, I'm going to just remind you once again that Bill Highway and Mariner are here for you. We are always delighted to be your partners in having good ideas, good conversation, good connections. And just like Sherry had said, and her email is in the chat, and we will put her email in the follow-up. Feel free to connect with any of us. 15 to 30 minutes on the phone with us. We could just maybe generate some ideas for you. And please, by all means, do let us know if we can help you with anything. But even if it's just to pick our brains, we are happy to. Love that, Liesl. We'll definitely put that on the list. Streaming advocacy across components. So there's nothing left for me to do except that on behalf of Bill Highway and Mariner to thank you for once again giving us an hour of your time. We're at the top of the hour. It has been our pleasure. And looks like we're going to have lots of topics that we're going to cover next year. But don't forget, we've got one more this year, November 8th. See you there to talk about ChatGPT. Until next time. Have a great day.